For 10 years, he slept on the same park bench. People ignored him, children feared him, police moved him along. Nobody knew what the metal he carried in his chest meant, until that night, when someone threatened the children. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we dive into this powerful story of hidden honor and second chances, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe that real heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, hit that subscribe button. These stories remind us that we should never judge a book by its cover. Samuel Sam Harris had been invisible for 10 years. Not literally. His 6 feet 2 inches frame and weathered face were hard to miss as he sat on bench number 7 in Riverside Park every morning at sunrise. But invisible in the way that homeless people become to a society that finds their existence inconvenient. He was 52 years old, though the lines etched deep into his face made him look older. His gray hair was unkempt, his beard patchy, and his clothes, layers of donated items that didn't quite fit, marked him immediately as someone living on the margins. A green army surplus jacket, too big for his frame, hung loose around his shoulders regardless of the season. To the morning joggers, he was an obstacle to navigate around. To the dog walkers, he was someone to avoid eye contact with. To the children walking to school, he was the scary man their parents told them not to stare at. To the police, he was a problem that needed periodic management. But Sam had rules. He never asked for money. He never bothered anyone. He cleaned up after himself, folding his blanket neatly each morning and storing it in the old duffel bag that served as his only furniture. He spoke only when spoken to, and that happened rarely. What nobody knew, what Sam never told anyone, was that inside the torn lining of that army jacket, wrapped in plastic and hidden from the world, was a small velvet box. Inside that box was a medal that fewer than 3,500 living Americans had ever received. The Medal of Honor, presented to Staff Sergeant Samuel Harris by the President of the United States in a ceremony at the White House on March 15, 2008. Sam hadn't always been invisible. Once he'd been the most visible man in America for exactly 15 minutes. News cameras, interviews, handshakes with senators. The whole country knew the story. How Staff Sergeant Harris had single-handedly held off an enemy assault in Afghanistan for 6 hours, saving his entire unit and 36 civilians sheltering in a compound. How he'd taken shrapnel in 4 places but kept fighting. How he'd carried wounded Marines to safety under enemy fire, making 3 trips before collapsing from blood loss. The medal was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter. Honorable discharge, veterans' benefits, job opportunities, speaking engagements. Sam had done interviews, shook hands at military events, even met with corporate executives who wanted to hire a real American hero. But the cameras never showed what happened when the lights went out. The nightmares that started 3 months after he came home. The way he'd wake up screaming, thinking he was still on that rooftop in Helmand Province. The hypervigilance that made him jump at car backfires and scan every room for exits. The survivor's guilt that ate at him like acid. Why had he lived when better men had died? The VA doctors had names for it. Post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, depression, anxiety. They had medications, too, pills that made him feel like he was watching his life through thick glass. Sam tried them all, tried therapy, tried group sessions with other veterans who looked as lost as he felt. But nothing worked for long. The dreams always came back. The guilt never left. And slowly, the hero everyone wanted to celebrate began to disappear, even from himself. He lost his apartment first, couldn't handle the lease, couldn't deal with neighbors, couldn't function in the normal world that seemed impossibly complex after the simplicity of combat. Then his car, sold for cash to survive another month. Then his phone, his address, his connections to the life he'd once known. His family tried to help at first. His sister called, begged him to come stay with her in Ohio. His former commanding officer reached out, offered connections and opportunities. But Sam had learned something in those dark months after coming home. Sometimes the weight of being someone's hero is heavier than the weight of being nobody at all. So he chose to be nobody. He let his hair grow out, stopped shaving regularly, traded his dress uniform for thrift store clothes. He found Riverside Park by accident one night when he had nowhere else to go, and bench number 7 became his refuge. For 10 years, he'd been nobody, and most days, that felt like exactly what he deserved. Sam's day began at 5:30 a.m., not by choice, but by habit. His body never forgot military time, never learned to sleep past dawn. He'd fold his blanket with the same precision he'd once used to fold his dress blues, stow it in his duffel bag, and begin his morning patrol. That's what he called it, a patrol, walking the perimeter of the park, checking for anything out of place, any potential threats. It wasn't paranoia, he told himself. It was situational awareness, old habits. The park was different at dawn, peaceful. The only sounds were birds and the distant hum of early morning traffic. Sam knew every tree, every path, every hiding spot where teenagers might leave beer bottles or drug paraphernalia. He'd clean up what he found, not because anyone asked him to, but because this was his area of responsibility now. By 7 a.m., the joggers would start appearing. Sam would position himself on his bench, out of their way, but with clear sight lines of the entire park. He knew most of them by sight now. The woman in the red running shoes who always stopped to stretch by the fountain. The man with the German shepherd who took the same route, clockwise, around the pond. The group of college students who came through on their way to the campus coffee shop. He never spoke to them, and they never spoke to him. That was the unspoken agreement. At 8 a.m., the children would start walking through on their way to Roosevelt Elementary. This was the part of his day that mattered most, though Sam never acknowledged why, even to himself. He'd watch them from his bench, noting which ones walked alone, which ones seemed scared, which ones were being followed too closely by strangers. There was Maria, the 10-year-old who always carried too many books and struggled with the weight. Tommy, the boy with thick glasses who walked faster when he saw the group of older kids who sometimes waited by the gate. Sarah, the girl who walked with her little brother every morning, holding his hand and making sure he didn't wander off the path. Sam knew their routines better than their parents did. He knew that Maria's backpack was too heavy because her family couldn't afford a locker at school. He knew Tommy was being bullied because he'd seen the boys corner him once, and the fear in Tommy's eyes was something Sam recognized from combat, the look of someone who knew they were outgunned. He knew Sarah was only 8, but acted older because her parents worked early shifts, and she was responsible for getting her 5-year-old brother, David, to school safely. Sam never interfered, never spoke to them, but he watched, always. After the children passed, Sam would walk to the convenience store 6 blocks away. The owner, Mr. Patel, knew him as a quiet customer who always had exact change and never caused trouble. Sam would buy a coffee and whatever was about to expire, day-old sandwiches, yesterday's fruit, bread that was getting stale, food that was cheap because no one else wanted it. He'd eat breakfast back on his bench, then spend the afternoon in different parts of the park. Sometimes he'd sit by the pond, watching ducks and trying not to think about anything. Sometimes he'd nap in the shade of the old oak tree, though sleep rarely came easy. Evenings were the hardest. That's when the darkness crept in, when the memories tried to surface. Sam had learned to count things. Leaves on trees, cracks in the sidewalk, cars passing by, anything to keep his mind occupied, until exhaustion finally overtook him. By 10 p.m., the park would be empty, except for Sam. He'd settle on his bench, pull the thin blanket around him, and try to sleep. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But every morning he'd wake up and do it again. For 10 years, the same routine, the same invisible existence, until the night everything changed. October 18th started like any other day. Sam folded his blanket, checked his surroundings, began his morning patrol. The weather was crisp, autumn leaves crunching under his worn boots as he walked the familiar paths. But something was different. During his morning observation period, Sam noticed a man he hadn't seen before. Mid-30s, athletic build, clean clothes, but something off about his behavior. The man lingered near the playground, not jogging like the others, not walking a dog or heading somewhere specific, just watching. Sam's military training kicked in automatically. He noted details. The man's positioning gave him clear sight lines to the elementary school path. His body language suggested alertness, like someone waiting for something, and he kept checking his phone, not casually, but with the focused attention of someone coordinating with others. For 3 days, the man appeared. Same time, same position, same behavior. Sam began tracking him, using skills he'd thought were buried. Route of approach, duration of stay, patterns of movement. The man was definitely surveillance, though of what? Sam couldn't determine. On the 4th day, the man brought a friend. Sam watched from his bench as 2 men positioned themselves at different points around the park. One by the playground, one near the school path. Both trying to look casual, both failing to anyone who knew what to look for. That's when Sam spotted the van. It was parked across the street, engine running, driver visible through the windshield. The kind of setup that in Afghanistan would have meant one thing: kidnapping operation. Sam's pulse elevated for the first time in years. His hands, which normally shook slightly from years of poor nutrition and untreated medical issues, suddenly became steady. His mind, usually clouded by depression and medication, sharpened to crystal clarity. He knew this pattern. He'd seen it in briefings, had been trained to recognize it. This wasn't random crime. This was a planned operation targeting specific individuals, and those individuals were about to walk through the park on their way to school. At 7:58 a.m., Sam saw Maria coming down the path, struggling with her heavy backpack as always. Behind her, Tommy with his thick glasses, walking fast but not fast enough to outrun whatever was about to happen. And further back, Sarah holding little David's hand, both of them laughing at something only they found funny. Sam looked at the 2 men, now moving into position. Looked at the van, still idling. Looked at the children, innocent and unaware. For 10 years, he'd been invisible. For 10 years, he'd told himself that his fighting days were over, that he'd done enough, sacrificed enough, that he deserved to just fade away and let the world handle its own problems. But as he watched David trip and laugh while his sister helped him up, as he saw Maria adjust her backpack straps because the weight was hurting her shoulders, as he noticed Tommy glance nervously around the way Sam had seen soldiers do when they sensed an ambush, he made his choice. Sam stood up from bench number 7 for the first time in months. He walked to his duffel bag and reached inside, past the folded blanket, past the spare clothes, to the bottom where he'd kept something hidden for 10 years. The Colt .45 was wrapped in an oiled cloth, unregistered and untraceable. Sam had carried it home from Afghanistan, had told himself he'd turn it in to authorities someday. But someday never came, and now he understood why. He checked the weapon with movements so automatic they might have been muscle memory from another lifetime. Magazine loaded, safety off, chambered round. The weight in his hands felt familiar, comfortable in a way that nothing else had for 10 years. Sam looked up and saw the first man moving toward Maria, timing his approach for when she'd be hidden from street view by a cluster of trees. What happened next would be analyzed by FBI behavioral specialists for months afterward. Security cameras from 3 different angles captured most of it. though they couldn't capture the moment when Samuel Harris stopped being an invisible homeless man and became Staff Sergeant Harris again. The first man reached for Maria's arm just as she passed the oak tree. His partner was closing in on Tommy from the opposite direction. The van had pulled closer to the curb. Sam moved like someone half his age. 10 years of military conditioning, buried under layers of trauma and neglect, suddenly returned as if it had never left. His first priority was the children. Get them away from the threat zone. His second priority was neutralizing the threats before they could adapt to his interference. "Kids, get down and stay down," he called out, his voice carrying an authority that made all 3 children drop immediately without question. It was the voice of someone who expected to be obeyed, the voice of a leader in combat. The first man, surprised by the intervention, reached inside his jacket. He was fast, but not fast enough. Sam put 2 rounds center mass before the man's weapon cleared its holster. The second man, seeing his partner go down, abandoned his approach on Tommy and moved to assist. Sam was already repositioning, using the trees for cover, creating angles that prevented the van driver from having a clear shot. The second gunman was better trained than the first. Military background, Sam assessed quickly. Professional movements, good instincts. This was going to be more difficult. Sam called out to the children without taking his eyes off the threat. "Maria, Tommy, Sarah, when I say run, you take David and you run toward the street. You scream as loud as you can, and you don't stop until you find a police officer. Understand?" "Yes, sir," came Sarah's voice, small but steady. The second gunman was trying to flank Sam's position, using parked cars for cover. The van was moving, trying to get into a better position for either extraction or fire support. Sam had to end this before it became a prolonged engagement with civilians in the danger zone. He moved with tactical precision that would have impressed his old unit commanders, covering fire to suppress the gunman, then a quick advance that closed the distance before his opponent could react. Hand-to-hand combat skills that Sam had thought were lost to years of alcohol and despair suddenly returned with perfect clarity. The engagement lasted 97 seconds total. When it was over, 2 men were down. 1 van was fleeing with bullet holes in the windshield, and 4 children were safe. Sam secured the weapons, checked the children for injuries, and called 911 from a phone he hadn't used in 3 years. His hands were shaking again, but not from fear or poor health. From adrenaline, from the familiar aftermath of combat. "This is Samuel Harris," he said when the dispatcher answered. "I need police and paramedics at Riverside Park. 2 suspects down, 4 children safe, immediate medical attention required." The police arrived within 6 minutes. Paramedics were right behind them. And within 20 minutes the park was swarming with federal agents who seemed very interested in knowing how a homeless man had managed to neutralize what they quickly determined was a professional kidnapping operation. Detective Ray Martinez was the first to interview Sam. He found him sitting on bench number 7, surrounded by evidence bags and crime scene tape, still wearing his oversized army jacket and speaking in the clipped, precise tones of someone giving a military debrief. "Mr. Harris," Detective Martinez began, "I need to understand what happened here." 2-man ground team, 1 vehicle support," Sam replied, automatically. "Professional operation, military training apparent. Target appeared to be the children, likely kidnapping for ransom based on positioning and approach pattern." Martinez blinked. "Sir, what's your background?" For a moment Sam hesitated. Then he reached inside his jacket and pulled out the small velvet box he'd hidden for 10 years. He opened it carefully, revealing the metal that caught the afternoon light with a gleam that seemed almost sacred. "Staff Sergeant Samuel Harris," he said quietly, "United States Army, retired, Medal of Honor recipient." The detective stared at the medal, then at Sam, then back at the metal. "Holy shit," he whispered, then caught himself. "I mean, sir, this is unexpected?" Sam asked, a ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time in years. Within an hour, the park was swarming with even more officials, FBI, Secret Service, military liaison officers. Word had spread quickly through law enforcement channels. The homeless man who'd taken down a kidnapping operation was a decorated war hero. But the most important visitors were Maria, Tommy, Sarah, and David, accompanied by their parents, who had arrived in various states of panic and gratitude. Maria was the first to approach Sam where he sat on his bench, now surrounded by official attention, but somehow still seeming separate from it all. She walked up slowly, her heavy backpack forgotten, her young face serious. "Mr. She started, then stopped, uncertain. "You can call me Sam," he said gently. "Mr. Sam," she continued, "my mom says you saved us. She says you're a hero." Sam looked at her. This 10-year-old who'd been walking through his park every morning for years, who'd struggled with her heavy books while he'd watched silently from his bench. "I just did what needed to be done," he said. "But you could have been hurt," Maria said. "You could have died. Why did you help us?" For a long moment, Sam didn't answer. Then he looked at all 4 children, standing there with their parents, safe and whole and alive. "Because that's what soldiers do," he said finally. "We protect people who can't protect themselves." Tommy, the boy with thick glasses who'd been targeted by bullies and kidnappers alike, stepped forward. "Are you really a war hero? Like in the movies?" Sam shook his head. "Real heroes aren't like in the movies, son. Real heroes are just people who do the right thing when it matters, even when they're scared." "Were you scared today?" Sarah asked, still holding David's hand. "Terrified," Sam admitted. "But being scared doesn't mean you don't act. It means you act even though you're scared." David, the 5-year-old who'd laughed while walking through the park that morning, tugged on his sister's sleeve. "Sarah," he whispered loudly, "is he the man from the bench, the one who's always there?" Sarah looked at Sam with new understanding. "You've been watching us," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "Every morning," Sam confirmed, "making sure you got to school safely." "Why?" Maria asked. Sam considered the question. How could he explain to children that watching over them had been the only thing giving his life meaning for 10 years? That their safety had become his mission, his reason to keep going when everything else felt hopeless. "Because you reminded me of why I became a soldier in the first place," he said finally. "To protect families, to make sure children can walk to school without being afraid." The media attention was inevitable. By evening, news trucks lined the street outside Riverside Park. Reporters wanted interviews, cameras wanted footage, the internet wanted content. The story was too perfect for modern media. "Homeless veteran reveals Medal of Honor while saving children from kidnappers." Sam declined all interviews. He sat on his bench, now inexplicably surrounded by flowers and cards and offers of help from strangers, and tried to process what had happened to his carefully constructed, invisible life. Detective Martinez found him there as the sun was setting. "Mr. Harris," the detective said, settling onto the bench beside him, "I've got some news about the investigation." Sam nodded, listening. "The 2 men you stopped, they're part of a larger operation. Federal agents have been tracking them for months. Turns out they were targeting children of high-profile families for ransom. Sarah and David's father is a federal judge. Maria's mother works for the State Department. Tommy's parents are research scientists with defense contracts." Sam absorbed this information without surprise. He'd suspected as much from the professional nature of the operation. "The thing is," Martinez continued, "without your intervention, those kids would be gone right now." The FBI estimates this group has successfully taken at least a dozen children over the past 2 years. You didn't just save 4 kids today. You broke up an entire criminal enterprise. They sat in silence for a while, watching the last reporters pack up their equipment. "What happens now?" Sam asked finally. "Now? Now you're a hero again, whether you want to be or not. The VA is already reaching out, wanting to fast-track your benefits. Military organizations want to honor you. The city wants to give you a key or a medal or something." Sam shook his head. "I don't want any of that." "What do you want?" Sam looked around the park, at bench number 7, where he'd spent 10 years learning to be nobody, at the paths where children walked safely every morning because someone was watching over them. "I want to keep doing my job," he said. The media attention faded, as it always does. Other stories took over the news cycle. Other heroes emerged to capture public attention. But some things changed permanently. Sam Harris was no longer invisible. The VA had indeed fast-tracked his benefits, providing him with proper housing and medical care for the first time in a decade. Therapy helped. Real therapy this time, from doctors who understood combat trauma and survivors' guilt. But every morning at 7:58 a.m., Sam was still on bench number 7 in Riverside Park. Not because he was homeless anymore, but because it was where he belonged. The children still walked through on their way to school, but now they waved. Maria had gotten a new backpack, lighter, with better straps. Tommy walked with more confidence, his shoulders straighter. Sarah and David still held hands, but David wasn't afraid to explore the edges of the path because he knew someone was watching. Sometimes other veterans found their way to the park. Word had spread quietly through the community. If you needed someone who understood, who wouldn't judge, who knew what it was like to carry invisible wounds, you could find Sam Harris on bench number 7. He helped when he could, sometimes just by listening, sometimes by sharing hard-won wisdom about living with trauma, sometimes by reminding fellow veterans that their service mattered, that they mattered, even when, especially when, they couldn't see it themselves. On the 6-month anniversary of what the media had dubbed the Riverside Park incident, a small ceremony was held, not by the city or the military, but by the families of the 4 children Sam had saved. Maria, now 11 and reading at a high school level, gave a speech she'd written herself. "Mr. Sam taught us that heroes don't always look like what we expect. Sometimes they look like regular people. Sometimes they look like people who need help themselves. But what makes them heroes isn't how they look or where they live or what medals they have. What makes them heroes is that when someone needs protecting, they protect them, even when they're scared, even when they have their own problems, even when no one is watching." She paused, looking directly at Sam, who was sitting in the audience wearing a clean but simple shirt and fighting back tears. Mr. Sam was watching over us for years before that day. He was our guardian angel, and we didn't even know it. And now we know that real angels don't have wings. They have army jackets and kind hearts, and they sit on park benches making sure children get to school safely. After the ceremony, as families were dispersing, and Sam was preparing to return to his bench for evening watch, Tommy approached him. The boy, now 12, and no longer wearing thick glasses thanks to corrective surgery his grateful parents had finally been able to afford, held out a small wrapped package. "This is for you, Mr. Sam," he said. Sam unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a simple wooden frame containing a photograph, all 4 children, smiling and safe, standing in front of bench number 7. At the bottom, in careful child's handwriting, was inscribed, "To our guardian, thank you for watching over us." Sam stared at the photograph for a long moment, then looked up at Tommy. "Thank you," he managed. "Mr. Sam," Tommy said, "will you always be here, on the bench?" Sam considered the question seriously. As long as you need me to be, he said finally. Forever then, Tommy replied with the absolute certainty that only children possess. Samuel Harris understood something that night that he'd forgotten during 10 years of invisibility. Heroism isn't a moment in time, captured by photographers and celebrated with medals. Heroism is a choice made every day, often by people no one notices, in ways that matter more than anyone realizes. He'd spent 10 years thinking his service was over, that his purpose had died on that rooftop in Afghanistan, along with the brothers who didn't come home. He'd believed that surviving when others died made him less worthy, not more responsible. But watching over 4 children walk safely to school every morning had taught him that service never really ends. It just takes different forms. Sometimes it's holding a position under enemy fire. Sometimes it's making sure a little girl's backpack isn't too heavy. Sometimes it's being the guardian angel that no one knows they need until the moment when they need you most. The Medal of Honor sat now in a place of respect in Sam's small apartment, but it wasn't hidden anymore. Not because he needed the recognition, but because he'd learned that hiding from honor was just another way of hiding from responsibility. Every morning Sam Harris took his position on bench number 7, not as an invisible homeless man, but as what he'd always been. A soldier with a mission, a guardian with people to protect, a hero who understood that the most important battles are often fought in plain sight by people who never expect parades. The children walked safely to school. Sam watched over them, and in a world that often felt chaotic and dangerous, there was something quietly beautiful about that simple truth. Some missions never end. They just find new ways to matter. So I ask you, have you ever walked past someone and assumed you knew their story? Have you ever met a quiet guardian who was protecting you in ways you never realized? Someone whose greatest battles were invisible, whose service went unrecognized, whose heroism was hidden behind circumstances beyond their control. Share their story in the comments. Tell us about the hidden heroes in your life, the people who watch over others without asking for credit, who serve without expecting recognition. Because here at the Human Stories, we believe that real heroes are all around us. Sometimes they wear uniforms, sometimes they wear army surplus jackets, sometimes they live in mansions, sometimes they sleep on park benches, but they all share one thing. When someone needs protecting, they stand up and protect them. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it. Help us honor the quiet guardians who stand watch over a world that doesn't always remember to thank them. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, remember, heroes don't always have homes, but they always have hearts big enough to protect others.